Hey everyone, and welcome to my patch 13.3 mid lane tier list. Quite a lot has changed since the previous patch we did a tier list on, which was 13.1, so it's time for an update, and we'll go through all the changes. As a quick reminder, I do have a separate tier list for low elo, which you can go back and look at. It should still be very up to date. So if you're in, bronze or kind of like iron to gold, I would recommend checking that one out as well. Obviously, this tier list can still be useful for you though. So let's start with the really obvious ones, which is probably Annie is the big one. So on 13.3, they said it was a nerf, but I think it was just they kind of mistyped it. They buffed Annie pretty much across the board. I won't go through all the changes, but essentially they just massively buffed her E. They buffed it in shield strength, AP ratio, cooldown, retaliation damage. They made it proc of not just basic attacks, but spells as well. And they also buffed her ult, just like how tanky it is. So just massive buff across the board. And also, they made her start the game with stun, which is actually kind of nice. So for like those level 1 invades and stuff, it was kind of crazy how many things they did. And actually, she went up to like 59% win rate, and then she got hotfixed, which is like made her win rate come back down. But I think the fact that she's so simple and so strong means she's probably S tier. I think if we're talking about high challenger, she probably isn't S tier, but like realistically, if you're high challenger and watching this video, you probably don't need my tier list. I think for pretty much every other elo, Annie is just extremely broken, extremely easy, so definitely worth abusing, at least at the moment. Second one let's talk about is Asol. So Asol, in my opinion, is actually probably S tier, but I've put in an A+. So here's the reason. They did a massive rework on Asol. They changed pretty much everything about him, so I'm not going to go through all that either, but he seems really, really strong. I'd say his biggest weakness is probably the early game, but with stuff like Catalyst, it's definitely easy to manage. And he scales like an absolute monster, and he does a ton of damage, brings a ton of CC as well. And importantly, the way his ult works now is he can get this empowered ult that's absolutely insane for dragon fights, which a lot of solo queue comes down to, those 5v5 dragon fights. The reason I only have him an A+ and not S tier is because, one, I think Asol is a pretty different champion before, and I don't think anyone's at the level where they've mastered him yet. I think it doesn't really play like anything else in the game, so it's going to take some time for people to get really good at him. I also think that, like, given the fact that he's like so new, has like a fairly average win rate with such a high pick rate, definitely suggests that he's strong. And on top of that, people are definitely still working out what the best build is. I will do kind of a short guide on Asol later in the week, so look forward to that. But I think if we look at kind of the item builds that Asol is going for, there's like still a lot of variation, and people haven't really decided what is the best. Like, for example, I've been playing with something more like this, like Roa, Ryze, and then looking towards Rabadons. A lot of people go tier. Some people have been saying Ryze into Roa is the play. Some people are saying that Roa isn't good and Liandry's is the best. And then when it comes to skills, I've tried Emax first and it seems good. I've tried Qmax first and it seems good. Some people have been doing Wmax second. So basically what I'm saying is that I think most likely this champion is really broken. But right now, people still haven't figured out what is actually optimal on him in terms of items, builds, runes, abilities, all that sort of stuff. And also people just aren't the best at them, right? But I think if you're looking for a champ to learn right now, most likely by next patch, when people have figured out what is optimal on him, I think he will be an S tier champion. And if his win rate doesn't end up going up, right, we'll buff him because it's a rework, right? So definitely look towards Asol. I think it's very high chance that next patch he is like the best mid in the game. But at least for now, I think he's not quite on this level. So another one is Zoe. So in 13.1, I think it was, Zoe got a change on her E, where they made it so enemies afflicted with sleep now have their MR reduced by 20 to 30%. Now this debuff disappears when the target is woken up. So basically what this means is that your first hit on the E, which will almost always be your Q, is going to deal more damage because they have their MR reduced by 30%. And this is massive for Zoe. One, because Zoe is a champ that needs to one-shot people. Two, because Zoe really struggles with dealing with tanky members. And three, because against Zoe, people almost always build Merc Treads because the tenacity is really valuable. So that means that you are always going to get value out of this. It also means that you don't have to itemize Void as early in the game as perhaps some other champions do. So overall, it's like a really nice buff. And to be honest, Zoe is always pretty good in solo queue. Like, it's definitely a strong snowballing champ. It's relatively blind pickable, and it's good in most games. And this kind of means that Zoe's weaknesses are just like a lot mitigated. I think it's really, really strong. And I've been looking at a lot of Hailu Korea, and they've been doing very, very well on Zoe. I think this champ will probably get a lot more play once pro play starts playing it a bit more. And at least for now, most of pro play is still in 13.1 or 13.1b. But the next couple of weeks, I would expect to see the Zoe priority go up quite a lot. And then I think you should see her more in solo queue as well. But I think she's very, very strong. So definitely worth putting some time into. Now the next one is Kassadin. So Kassadin was S tier before, and I've moved him down. So Kassadin received actually 2 sets of nerfs, and I think they were both to his E. There was like a Kassadin nerf here. There was like another Kassadin nerf in this patch as well, and I think it was like mainly like E damage, E cooldown, stuff like that. And I think what it's done is it's kind of moved Kassadin back from being that just, we can pretty much blind this champ whenever, and moving him more into the counter pick role. So if you're just going to pick Kassadin every game and like not care about comp or matchup or anything, I think he's probably lower than this. Probably put him like low A, high B sort of stuff. But I think if you're using Kassadin kind of back to how he's meant to be used, like as a counter pick into like easy matchups, and just like when your champ or when your team has quite a lot of early game strength, so you can kind of get Kassadin through the early game, as well as when the enemy team doesn't have much CC, those are kind of the perfect Kassadin games. And I think he's still very strong at that. It's just now he's no longer that, we can just blind pick this champion at any time and it's completely fine. So the next one is actually just AD mids as a whole. So this is stuff like Aurelia, Zed, Yone, Talon, Tristana. The thing with AD mids right now is that most AD mids aren't actually that strong. And the reason for that is that Rod of Ages is really, really OP, at least at countering those champions. Like, I think Rod of Ages is never really the highest damage option, but if you play against something like a Zed or a Talon, you can easily just buy Catalyst, take Spellbook, go Exhaust, take Bone Plating, and it makes it really, really difficult for these assassins to really end up going. So on their own, these AD mids aren't actually that strong. But the thing is, all of the strongest junglers right now are AP. So if you're thinking about like what is OP in the jungle meta, Maokai is strong, Elise is strong, Lilia just got a pretty big buff. So I think like, I would say Maokai and Elise are probably still the best junglers, even after the slight nerfs to Maokai. And what that means is that AD mids just go really well with them. And also, some of the ones that are less Assassiness type, so more like Yone and Aurelia, these work really well with Sejuani. And then like maybe stuff like Yasuo works well with Diana. So the thing with all the AD mids is that they are strong because of the AP junglers being strong. So if you're playing one of these without an AP jungler, they should drop significantly. But if you're playing these with the correct combos, then I think they're very, very strong. It makes your mid jungle 2v2 really good. And a lot of those AP junglers can help you kind of secure kills because they've got good gank setup, or just because they can lock them down and then you can just provide the damage. So I think these champs are actually good. I just really would be careful about picking them without the AP junglers, because that's really where all their strength comes from. Tristana specifically has kind of risen up because of the lethal tempo build and also the crit changes. I think Trist is pretty good and probably the AD mid that's least reliant on having an AP jungler, but Trist is like a little more matchup dependent, because I think Trist kind of needs to snowball, like not super hard, but if you can't take any plates, you can't get any kills as Trist, it can be real hard. Now, most people in lower elos probably won't know what to pick into Trist, but stuff that is good into Trist is things that either has a lot of kill threat after 6. So stuff like Zed is actually quite good. Now, if you snowball into Zed, it's really good. And again, like a lot of these champs like Fizz and Kiana that could maybe kill you at 6, you can build up a big enough lead pre-6 that it almost doesn't matter. But post-6, you do have to be quite careful. And the other scary stuff can be mids with CC. So like stuff like Victor W, Syndra E, stuff that really makes it difficult for you to just jump on your opponent whenever. Those can be counters. But yeah, overall, I think Tristana's come up quite a bit. And AD mids, they're still a bit reliant on AP junglers. Ryze, I've moved Ryze down a fair amount. I think the nerfs to him were kind of fair, I suppose. Like, I don't think he's as OP as before. And the reason I'm bringing him down a little is I still think he is quite effective, but he is similar to how the AD jungler or the AD mids are relying on having an AP jungler. Ryze is kind of like LeBlanc in that he is so much better if you have like an AD ganking jungler. And I think at the moment, because there are more AP junglers, at least in my games, I feel like the Ryze priority has dropped at least a little. But at the same time, like Maokai and Elise do get banned quite a lot. And that means that like, yeah, then at that point, there will be a lot of AD junglers coming out, stuff like Wukong's. So then Ryze can be really good. I think, yeah, it's just like a bit more jungle reliant. It's hard to just put him in S tier and be like, yeah, we can pick this champ whenever. Now you have to be a bit more careful about picking it, but if you're still a Ryze main, I think you can still do really well with them. Sylas. So Sylas have actually dropped a lot, and the reason is that I can't remember which patch it was in. There was, I think it was this patch here. Yeah, it was this patch where they changed Grievous Wounds to where just for 800 gold, you can get 40% Grievous Wounds, which is really, really OP. I think a lot of champions now, when they play up against Sylas in lane, can just itemize Grievous Wounds, and that makes it really difficult because Sylas in most of his lanes, it's like either versus range, you can kind of poke them out. But at the end of the day, like the way you're going to secure kills is by like diving on them. And obviously if they get healing cut early, it really destroys your skirmishing. And then a lot of those melee champions that Sylas is sometimes picked into, like for example, you might pick Sylas into Akali, which is like the matchup's not great, but Sylas normally goes down 10 CS and then he scales really well into Akali. But the problem is now Akali can actually just rush Morello, like a full Morello, because it's been changed to give pen and the Grievous Wounds is much higher. So yeah, it's like, I feel like it's quite hard to pick Sylas at the moment, and I'm not too sure what I'd really be picking him into. I guess, like, if you see really good ults on the enemy team, you can still consider it. And there are definitely some good matchups still, like Swain and stuff, but I just feel like overall, Sylas has lost, like, a lot of his strength recently. That being said, though, he is one of those champs that's, like, pretty much always relevant in solo queue, right? Like, it's just a strong solo queue champ overall. But I do think he's just significantly weaker than before. I think a lot of these champions up here are very, very good against Sylas. Like, I think, honestly, like, pretty much everything up here is good against Sylas, except for maybe Syndra. So, yeah, it's definitely getting harder and harder to pick this champ. Although, Sylas Sejuani is a really good combo. So, if you get that, you can look for that. But even then, I think I'd rather play something like Yone was Sej. But there are options, right? There's definitely options. Orianna, so I've actually moved Orianna down, even though she received some changes. So the thing is, I'd say the Ori changes were, let's see, I think it was actually, was it in 13.1b? I believe it was. Yeah, okay, so it was this patch. And what they did is they actually pretty much, they nerfed her Q and they buffed her R. So like, she scales a little bit better, but has a little bit weaker lane. So the reason I've actually moved Ori down is because even though I think the buffs are relatively neutral and that it doesn't really change Ori much for solo queue, because I think like laning is very important in solo queue, especially right now, and having that being weaker sort of sucks. The scaling being nice is good, but I think a lot of games are decided before this really matters. But yeah, back to the reason I've put it down, it's because I can't really think of that many times when I'd rather pick Ori over something like Talia or Victor or Zoe or something like that, right? I just feel like she doesn't have that great a niche at the moment. It's not like she's weak. Like, honestly, you could make a pretty good argument for Ori still being like a fairly solid A tier champion, but I just don't really pick her very often. Like, I feel like I've played maybe 1 or 2 Ori games this season, and I think I've actually won both. Like, they've been good Ori games, but it's just so often I'm just picking other stuff, and it's kind of like I'm picking Ori maybe when like I have a hyper carry jungler like a Kindred, and also I have like, I don't know, maybe an assassin lane where I'm a bit scared of picking something else. But I don't know, even then, stuff like Ryze, Galio, Lissandra might be better. So yeah, Ori, she's definitely not weak by any means. It's just she doesn't have much of a niche at the moment, at least in my opinion. And our last one here is LeBlanc. So LeBlanc received some changes in 13.3, which were changes to her Q, so mana down, and also extra mana here, which is pretty nice, and the cooldown going down is nice as well. So they're all kind of nice changes. Now LeBlanc, I think, gets a lot of hate in solo queue because her win rate is typically very low, and the reason for that is because, again, LeBlanc is quite a niche champion in that she needs a lot of things, right? Like, she needs an AD ganking jungler. She needs her lane not to be too hard. Ideally, she's not versus a Roa laner, because then they can go like Roa Mercs and just be impossible to kill. So I would say LeBlanc is quite difficult to pick at the moment, but when you get good LeBlanc games, it is a really strong champion still. And the buffs are nice. I just don't think they really fix the problem of her being sort of difficult to pick. Like, if we're thinking of a lot of these matchups like up here, I think the only chance you have to really snowball these matchups as LeBlanc is with a ganking jungler. And if you're just like, you know, if you're going even in these matchups, a lot of the time you're going to be in big trouble. So yeah, it's kind of scary, I think, to just pick LeBlanc randomly. That being said, LeBlanc is a really good champion against a lot of these lower tier picks. So if your opponents aren't picking meta champs, then you can quite easily get away with LeBlanc. But yeah, be very careful just picking her randomly. Try and pick her with an AD ganking jungler if possible, and try and make sure your matchup isn't too hard. But overall, yeah, I think that is pretty much going to be it for the tier list on 13.3. So let me know what you guys think. I don't think there's like a few changes, and they're pretty significant, but I'd say the vast majority of champs actually haven't been changed. It's just more this S, A, and A plus tier I feel like have changed a fair amount. Definitely keep your eyes on A Sol, but yeah, I think that's kind of my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. That will be it for this video, so go ahead and like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.